I would like to start first by saying our mahalos. Thank you to the law school for hosting us today and to Dean Nick Marquet for approving our CLE credit. Thank you to the William S. Richardson School of Law Alumni Association for organizing this event, and especially Debbie Lee for being the driving force pushing me to get this presentation done, and to Jim Willison for all his marketing and logistical support. Thank you to Pacific Forum, Hawaii's premier think tank on Indo-Pacific issues, and especially Jeff Otto and Anita Aravina for agreeing to film our event, edit the video, and host the video online. And last but certainly not least, thank you to my co-speakers Eric Chu and Professor Carol Peterson for agreeing to be here today and to share their incredible insights on this very timely and important topic. Our discussion will be broken up into 3 parts. I will be speaking first to set the context for the discussion. I will provide a brief overview of Taiwan's history and the events that led us to the current geopolitical situation. Eric will speak next and discuss Taiwan's transition from dictatorship to democracy, Taiwan's semiconductor industry, and the interplay between the rule of law and Taiwan's commercial success. And Professor Peterson will close us out with a discussion of the example of Hong Kong and how it affects Taiwan today, and the role international law plays in relations between Taiwan, China, and the United States. Professor Carol Peterson is the Cades Foundation Professor of Law at the William S. Richardson School of Law. After practicing law for 5 years in New York City and Honolulu, Carol taught law in Hong Kong for 17 years. She served as the director of the University of Hong Kong Center for Comparative and Public Law from 2001 to 2004 and assisted members of the Hong Kong Legislative Council to draft bills prohibiting discrimination while publishing extensively on human rights issues. Carol is now a full-time professor at the Richardson School of Law, where she has served as the Director of International Programs from 2021 to June 2024. She also advises JD students seeking the Certificate in International and Comparative Law and is a member of the Pacific Asian Legal Studies Program and Mānoa's Center for Chinese Studies. In 2021, Carol received the Lifetime Achievement Award for Hawaiʻi women lawyers for her work on international human rights law. Carol is a member of the American Society of International Law and the American branch of the International Law Association. She is currently serving as a member of the International Law Association's Committee on the Protection of Persons at Sea. Eric Chu is pursuing his JD degree here at the William S. Richardson School of Law at the University of Hawaii. He holds an LLM in intellectual property law from George Washington University Law School and an LLM from Soochow University in Taipei, Taiwan. Additionally, he earned a BA from Tung Hai University in Taichung, Taiwan. A native Mandarin speaker, Eric has worked as a law clerk at Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, a legal administrator at Windbound Electronics Corporation, a semiconductor company specializing in memory chip manufacturing, a consultant at Duane Morris, and assisted the American Institute in Taiwan with promoting the Select USA initiative. Born and raised in Taiwan, Eric served in the Taiwan Navy for 2 years on the missile-guided frigate PFG Panchao. He and his wife Liz now reside in Honolulu with their children Matthew and Karina. And as I mentioned at the top, I am Sammy Wilder King II. I was born and raised here in Honolulu, Hawaii. After graduating from Punahou High School, always important to mention in Hawaii, I graduated from Georgetown University's Walsh School of Foreign Service in 2006. After working as a consultant to the Pentagon Renovation Program and interning at the Senate, I traveled to Baghdad, where I worked for the Research Triangle Institute as a USAID subcontractor. Upon returning home, I attended William S. Richardson School of Law. While I focused primarily on property law, I was also privileged to be awarded an East-West Center Graduate Degree Fellowship and lucky enough to be taught international law by Professor Peterson herself while on the University of Hawaii's internationally acclaimed Jessup International Moot Court team. After graduating law school, I clerked for Justice Richard Pollack at the Hawaii State Supreme Court and have since that time worked in real estate development and contract law. In addition to my international work and studies, I've been blessed with the opportunity to travel to more than 40 countries throughout Asia, Europe, the Middle East, and Africa. And last but certainly not least, I am a past board member of the William S. Richardson School of Law Alumni Association, which is how Debbie Lee convinced me to put this panel discussion together. A brief history of Taiwan. And what are all these names? Taiyuan, Republic of Formosa, Republic of China. We're going to go through every single one of those things. So, setting the stage for the question, we're talking about Taiwan-China international relations. And as you all know, China claims that Taiwan's part of China, and they reserve the right to use force to reunite, quote unquote, Taiwan with China. But how do we get here? Why are we even talking about this? Why does China think they have these claims? What's the history? So a little bit of context, a little bit of an overview. We're going to go over each one of these steps in the brief 30 minutes I've got going on, and then we'll go into more detail, especially in the later ones. So from pretty much 0 ACE, immediately after the birth of Christ, to 1624, there's not a lot of history, archaeology about Taiwan, but as you can see from this map, which I took a picture of at the PACFest 2024 Taiwan tent, which they had here at the convention center, there is a connection between Taiwan and Hawaii, where we're giving this talk today. And it primarily comes from Austronesian languages and genetic mapping, where the origin of the first people to arrive in Hawaii is most likely from Taiwan. There was Austronesian tribes in Taiwan that spread out from there, and many of those people are still in Taiwan today. And you can see the map human expansion. It's very fascinating little tidbit connecting back to UH Law School where we are today. The name Taiwan the name Taiwan itself is a little bit obscure. Where did that name come from? It's not entirely clear. There's a term Taiwan that the indigenous tribes of Taiwan used possibly to refer to the Chinese immigrants that came in, and that might have been a factor. Taiwan might have been a name, the Chinese characters that were used to describe some Dutch fort, means like bay, platform. So it's just a fascinating historical tidbit, but that's kind of where we start our journey on the history of Taiwan. And we're going to burn right through a lot of history of Taiwan, by the way, and just keep going. There's so much more. I don't mean any disrespect to anyone in particular, or do I including them or excluding them, but just by setting the context for the next two speakers, that's where that's how we have to do it. So Taiwan in the pre-colonial area, this is a map that the Japanese had created when they were colonizing Taiwan of the ethnic tribes and the distribution of them. So you can see where there's the eastern side of Taiwan has all these ethnic tribe breakdown, but the western side not so much. And why is that? Well, if you overlay it with a topographic map, you can see that that's the mountainous side of Taiwan. Taiwan has an eastern side that's all mountains, volcanoes created the island, and the western side is flatlands. Question?
Sorry, can I please see that first image again?
Of course.
Thank you.
And then overlaying, I was very excited about this transition that I could do where stuff.
So is the implication that on the west flat side, those were not indigenous groups? That's where Chinese and Japanese.
Well, yeah, there's a history to all of this. So the indigenous tribes prior to colonization covered, certainly the whole island. Yeah. There's not that much data on it, but as you get further along, you see maps like this. This is a Japanese postcard where it shows the Han Chinese left side, the western side, and the quote-unquote savage western side. And this is the division, essentially, is what starts to happen in Taiwan throughout its history. And this is the breakdown of some of the tribal groups that were in Taiwan during this time period.
You mean the eastern side, don't you say?
The eastern side is the flatlands, the western side is the mountainous side.
Wait.
Oh, sorry, did I say that backwards? You're right.
Yeah,
Eastern side is the mountain side, western side is the flatlands. Thank you.
You want to go back to the last slide? So this is, I think this map is mainly in Japanese colonial period, but you have to realize that there are, back then, there were already a lot of aboriginals being married to the Han people. So in the early days, there will be, there's a traditional saying that the immigrant from China, they're all males. There's no female. Even my family too, I think I'm the 7th generation. We have a family too that collects all the ancestors' bones and everything. We put it all together. So we identify the first generation, for example, my first generation is, my last name is Chu. So, so that I'll repeat a little bit so that the people on the Zoom will be able to hear.
This is
Thank
Eric,
you.
by the way, our second speaker.
So this is the map, I think, is a very good evidence and also, history that how the territory are divided into the Han, races, which is on the left, on the more dark yellow side, and the Aboriginal on the west side. But back then, even before the Japanese colonial period, there's a Dutch and the Spanish colonization, which Sam will mention shortly. But even before the Japanese colonial period, there already been a lot of interracial marriage, meaning the Han race has been married to Aboriginal females, and there's a very is a traditional, I'll say, forelock or whatever it is, that most of the Han people moving from China back then are males.
Fishermen and traders, right?
No, they are immigrants because it's very difficult to make a living in mainland China. That's why they've been moving on, just like nowadays,
Yeah.
right? People have economic difficulties, they can't make a living in China, so they're forced out. They need to move out so that they can sustain. And back then, because of traveling purposes, it's very difficult back then to travel even across the Taiwan Strait, right? So there are only males who could be physically capable of doing that. Back then, females, they have families or, they're physically not so capable that's able to sustain the long distance travel, so.
How long did it take let's say a regular sailboat to get from mainland China to Taiwan back then, if you know?
I was in the Taiwan Navy. When I was.
Maybe she goes.
I'll go down with
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, I'll go down with it. So there's, I used to be with Taiwan Navy and with the modern.
Why don't you introduce yourself a little bit since you're already talking, which is perfect.
My name is Eric Chu. I'm from Taiwan. As I identify myself, I think I'm the 7th generation or the 10th generation. After my first generation ancestor moved from China. So we had a family too that identify each generation, the father, the grandfather and grandmother, and I think it's very usual circumstance to see that only the male ancestor without the female, without his wife. And that is for a reason, because the family tree is a very man-dominated society back then, and the family too, the female, especially you are not Han people, you are, sort of neglected. Your bones are not allowed to go in the tomb. Yes, that's what it is. So let me finish.
To move.
Okay, let me finish introducing myself. I'm from Taiwan, and I'm here to do my JD. UH is very nice when you're off, so I'm finishing next May. Yes.
How long does it take to get from China to Taiwan?
Oh, yes. The modern ships, it takes 6 hours, but there is a very famous, we call it black current between the Taiwan Strait. So there are times it doesn't go straight. You have to go in deviation to get to Taiwan. So back then, I would say maybe 16 hours, 20 hours by ship.
Not that long.
But some people have actually swam to Kinmen Island from
Oh.
Maine.
But Kinmen is another story because it's
Yeah,
close
Very
to
close
Yeah,
to the
that's
mainland.
only-
to
yeah.
Manila.
You're ruining my surprise on Kim and I.
Sorry.
It's okay. All right, so thank you for all the questions, and please jump in, and yes, and
Professor Peterson and Eric will jump into on all of this historical stuff. And we can go back to all these slides also. So the one thing to note also is that Taiwan today, most of the development is on the
West side.
on the western half of the lowlands. And that's how it developed over time.
There's a fast train that goes from Taipei to Kaohsiung. Now it takes, a couple hours?
Shinkansen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know if they call that,
Yeah.
if they call it that, but yeah.
So after the colonial period starts in 1624, the name that many people know Taiwan by is Formosa. And Formosa is Portuguese for beautiful, and they call it Ilha Formosa, the beautiful island, as the Portuguese sailed by. The Spanish and the Dutch were the first European powers to colonize the area, and this is where you start seeing this separation between developed areas that are dominated by non-indigenous Taiwanese persons and the mountainous region that's dominated by the indigenous tribes. The Dutch eventually drive everybody out, but the Dutch are also the first people to start bringing in Han Chinese laborers en masse. So that's where the Chinese nation state starts having a population on Taiwan. But the indigenous tribes are still very much running much of the show, except to the extent that the Dutch drive them out.
Oh, that's
So
nice.
you like that transition?
Yeah, it was-
Thanks. One of the most exciting things about Taiwan's history is this guy, Koxinga. In 1644, the Qing dynasty in China defeats the Ming dynasty. And the Ming dynasty, the remnants of it, flee to Taiwan. And they have an ally named Koxinga who helps them conquer all of Taiwan from the Dutch. And one of the ironies and parallels with today is that the Ming plotted their revenge against the Qing from Taiwan, similar to how the KMT did. So they were planning on reinvading China from Taiwan. Never mind what the indigenous tribes were doing in Taiwan, but the Ming had their whole big plan. Koxinga was the guy that helped them conquer Taiwan from the Dutch. This statue is 38 meters tall. Those are trees at the bottom of that statue. That's how much people in Taiwan love Koxinga. And he's a very fascinating character, but a Han Chinese character eventually, or a Ming ally. Eventually he dies, his kids can't maintain the kingdom, and the king conquered Taiwan. King rule extends most to basically what is modern China today, is from the Qing dynasty. And you can see a little tiny kingdom of Tongning, which is Koxinga's kingdom, it ends in 1844. The end of the Qing dynasty in Taiwan happens because of the Sino-Japanese War in 1894 to 1895. And that is getting us closer to the modern security crisis we have today. Basically, the Qing lose to Japan in this war, and they cede Taiwan to the Japanese. During that time period, one very interesting event from an international legal perspective occurs, at least as far as I'm concerned, which is the declaration of the Republic of Formosa. Essentially, the Qing remnants don't want to be ceded to Japan, so they declare independence from both the Qing dynasty, which is now collapsing, and the Japanese. And they fight back against the Japanese for 150 days, which is not very long, but during that time, they created all the trappings of a nation state in the international stage. They did not get a lot of respect as a result of the treaty where the Qing were seceding to the Japanese the island, so they didn't get a lot of recognition. But they did in fact create this nation state where the Republic of Formosa was independent from any other country in the world, including modern China, including Japan. Eventually Japan conquers Taiwan, and they hold on to it until the end of World War II. Meanwhile, in China, the Qing dynasty collapses, and the Chinese Communist Party is formed.
Oh, it's the high floating meeting.
Thank you, Nita. And then the KMT declares the Republic of China. And during this time period, there's this warlord era where all these different factions control chunks of China. And the KMT allies with the Chinese Communist Party in this thing they call the Northern Expedition to conquer all of China, to bring it under the control of the KMT, the Republic of China. During this time, the alliance between the KMT and the Chinese Communist Party breaks down and the Chinese Civil War starts. They basically fight since from 1927, and they take a brief break for World War II because the Japanese show up and they're like, no, we want to fight and kill everybody. And so they fight back against them and stop, them from conquering all China. And at the end of World War II, something very, very fascinating happens. The UN Charter gets signed. And when countries sign the UN Charter, there's always big kind of questions like, well, what country do you come from? And they didn't really look at maps in great detail when they were signing the UN Charter because they didn't want to decide a lot of these kind of sticky questions. So they kind of just signed it. And so the question comes up and said, well, who signed for China? China was the first country to sign the UN Charter. I think a lot of it was homage to how many people in China died fighting Japanese imperialism. This is the Chinese signature page from the scan of the UN Charter, and that is the signature of the one Chinese Communist Party member. All the other signatures are from representatives of the KMT. And they were going to have only Chiang Kai-shek's guy sign, but the Chinese Communist Party apparently convinced everybody that they should have one guy, and that's who they got, Dong Gu. And the Chinese Communist Party likes to play this up on their official party website. They have a whole script about this guy and who he is and the fact that he signed it in bold strokes. And that's where there's that connection between China, the entity that signed the UN Charter, and the confusion around Taiwan. So, eventually, by October 1949, the KMT, after the UN Charter was signed, retreat to Taiwan, having lost the civil war on the mainland to the communists. That brings us to the KMT era of Taiwan, which Eric will go into more. Fundamentally, one of the things that happens is there's a dictatorship that's installed by the KMT, partially because of what we talked about way at the beginning, where it wasn't just Han Chinese people living there. The indigenous tribes were like, well, who are you? And so they had to declare martial law, and Chiang Kai-shek, he was a dictator from China, so he came in and was like, well, this is what we're going to do. But also during that time, he started liberalizing. He had more economic freedom, more reforms. There was an economic miracle in Taiwan. They started laying the groundwork for the semiconductor industry. That's one of the central pillars of their security and economic success today. And eventually, Taiwan does become a full democracy, and Eric will go into that more in 1996. So what are the foundations of today's security crisis? How does it come from World War II to today, and how does that all interplay? This is China today and Taiwan. One of the reasons we're having this talk today is because I found maps of Taiwan, and I started looking really, really closely at them and wondering what was going on here. And I noticed, if you can see, these little tiny blue dots right off the coast of China.
Yeah.
Are you kidding me, Taiwan? What is going on here? That big blue one is called Kinmen Island, which we talked about briefly before. That is 2 miles off the coast of China. Not to be alarmist, but if World War III is going to start, it's going to start right here. The Chinese, this is the foundation of the security crisis today in Taiwan. Not just China's claims, but the fact that there are hair trigger locations where conflict could start. And it has happened. So in the 1950s, immediately after all of these movements of people back and forth, the Korean War starts. Initially, Truman is not really that interested in Taiwan, he's not that concerned about it, but eventually, when the Korean War starts, he realized how vital Taiwan is to US security and international security. One of the most fascinating tidbits, which I definitely learned from Professor Peterson about Taiwan, is that Taiwan held the UN Security Council seat for China during the Korean War. That is why the Korean War was a UN action. because the Chinese Communist Party didn't have the veto power.
And Russia didn't show up.
And Russia didn't show up, and that was, which actually should have been a veto, but it wasn't, and now they've never missed a meeting since.
Yeah.
So, what happens during this time is that the US 7th Fleet starts sailing through Taiwan, and that prevents most of the conflict. But during that time, there are multiple Taiwan Strait crises where China does attack Kinmen Island and start bombing it, and the Taiwanese are holding them off. And especially after the 7th Fleet leaves, Mao is constantly trying to attack these islands and take them back, and he never succeeds.
How did it happen that Kinmen and these other teeny islands were they originally part of Taiwan? I mean, how did, that's your department.
Do you know,
okay.
Eric, where they were exactly administratively?
Well, he could say that.
I mean, I think the simple answer is that Chiang Kai-shek just left troops there and he didn't leave. But for the history.
Well, when the nationalist government, which is, controlled by Chiang Kai-shek back then,
Yeah.
You could say retreated or migrated to Taiwan. And back then, they had this concept that, it's just for a short term,
Temporary. Oh, yeah.
maybe a year, 5 year, they'll come back to China very soon. So that explains why the name still remains. And a lot of people, after the Civil War, they come to Taiwan, insist that we are Republic of China. We're not Taiwan. Taiwan is not our country. So there are, for the last 4 or 5 decades, it's always been an identity issue for Taiwanese. Are we Taiwanese? Are we Chinese? Are we for independent? Or we are for reunification with China? It's a very sad story, which I'll talk about later, but short answer to your question, Kinmen Island, they remain within the KMT, the nationalist control, since the Civil War.
Yeah, like.
Fundamentally, it's that the KMT had troops and Mao couldn't take it back. So eventually, Taiwan is re-credentialed out of having their UN seat. And this right here is UN General Assembly Resolution 2758. Now, Professor Peterson can talk about this in even more detail, but essentially what happens is that Nixon wants China on their side. This is one of my favorite Star Trek lines. Vulcan apparently paying very close attention to Earth's history. Essentially, Nixon wants to drive a wedge between the Chinese Communist Party and the Soviets during the Cold War, and stops resisting the re-credentialing of Taiwan. And it's a very important point, because
Well,
what happens-
it's the re-credentialing of what government would represent China.
Yeah.
I could just say,
Right.
here,
They weren't re-credentialing Taiwan. It was a decision by the General Assembly to change what government would represent China in the UN.
Yeah.
And that is one of the few things that the General Assembly has the power to do. Most General Assembly resolutions are non-binding on most things, but on internal matters like that, as in which government gets to sit in the General Assembly to represent a particular state, that is the General Assembly's decision. The next interesting one, if they ever vote on it, will be Afghanistan, because the Taliban has not yet been credentialed to represent Afghanistan. And so that is a General Assembly decision. Whereas most matters, if you read a General Assembly resolution, most of them are non-binding, but this one did have an impact.
I like that word, to expel forthwith.
Why? Yeah, you'll notice that they don't say Taiwan, and that actually becomes super relevant. So they say the representatives of Chiang Kai-shek. Now, one of the things that we remember about this, and we'll get into a little bit about this later, but there's these 6 assurances that underlie Taiwan's current security posture, especially with respect to the United States. And one of these assurances is that Taiwan's status as a country was not decided by this resolution or by any communications from the American government to the Chinese. So it's very specifically not decided at this time what Taiwan's status is. Independent, their own state, part of China, whatever it is. that's
nor would
not
they have
decided.
had the power to decide it. The General Assembly did not have that power.
And,
Eric, I think, wants to say something.
oh yeah, go for it.
I just want to remind everybody that this is only the US Department's position.
Right.
Right? So UN Assembly, they made a resolution, that is what it is. But what is the US position now and back in the Nixon's are very, very different. That's why that resolution being made. That's why, a lot of things happening. I will go into detail then.
Yeah, absolutely. No, thank you.
Interesting, the countries that were against it.
Yeah, essentially it is. Oh. Most of the Europeans voting in favor of the resolution, and Australia, some.
Australia was against, but Britain was for.
Yep.
And Brazil, well, that's
That's
because they're Portuguese.
So that brings us closer to today. The Ukraine effect. Essentially, one of the biggest problems Taiwan had from a security posture was that the KMT, Chiang Kai-shek, as we mentioned before, thought they were going to reinvade China. So what they were doing was buying tanks and jets, which are completely useless for defending Taiwan against an aerial bombardment from China, and will probably all be destroyed within the first couple of days. But they're very useful if you think you're going to reinvade China. That thinking seems to have come to an end based on all the reporting. And it's because of Ukraine. So I kind of coined this as the Ming syndrome. I totally made that up. And that was sort of what Taiwan was before. And after, Taiwan's now adopting the porcupine strategy.
Is that yours too?
Porcupine strategy actually came from, I think it was CSIS that came up with that one. But it might have been the Council on Foreign Relations too. But I think it's generally a term that's going out there. And they're basically buying now HIMARS, anti-ship missiles, anything that's cheap and resilient that allows them to defend against an amphibious landing and to fight a guerrilla action from the mountains where the indigenous tribes currently live, most likely. And this is US aid to Taiwan historically from Council on Foreign Relations. If you can see, there's this break, that's when the UN resolution happens, and then we've now started sending them more money, because apparently wars of conquest are back on the menu. So where does that leave us today? The Institute for the Study of War put out a great report as part of the reading materials and some great maps. And as you can see, there's Kinmen Island and Matsu Island and Wukui Islands, and they're just right off the coast of China. And there's the international, the midline is that solid black line, and then you have the contiguous waters, the territorial waters, different international legal rights that countries generally have. But in Taiwan's case, is it part of China? Is it their own thing? This is what it looks like. These islands are right off the coast of China. They've been part of wars between Taiwan and China in the past. And right now, there was recently an action where, and I don't remember this exactly, maybe Eric and Carol can clarify, but I believe there were fishermen from China who were arrested by the authorities on Kinmen. And then I think one of them might have actually died, and then some were arrested. So there's already international legal incidents occurring around Kinmen Island. So the Institute for the Study of War, let me back up one step. That brings us to what's going on now. So the People's Republic of China, the military of the People's Republic of China looks at Taiwan through this first island chain and second island chain concept. And the first island chain is Taiwan and Ryukyu Islands, and it kind of goes down into the South China Sea, where China has all these expansive territorial claims. They claim all of the South China Sea. Ironically, Taiwan also, I think today, still claims all of the South China Sea as well, based on the KMT's historic claims to all of China. So that's a little bit of confusion. But China recently did lose in the ICJ in a case that they tried to stay out of on all their territorial claims to the South China Sea.
That was not ICJ.
Oh, International Court of Arbitration?
International Tribunal. It was
Did they pay attention? Or did they just,
Oh, Large Sea Arbitration. Thank you, Professor. Yeah, so.
did they honor it?
No.
No.
So this, and now also you see here, the Taiwan Relations Act, Third Communique, and the Six Assurances. I'm not going to go into all of these in detail. Carol, I think you can cover some of them if they come up. But essentially, the Taiwan Relations Act, we used to have a security assurance, a security treaty with Taiwan after the UN General Assembly resolution. We backed off of that, we canceled it. But then when Congress passed the Taiwan's Relations Act, which basically said we're going to fund Taiwan with sufficient funds to protect themselves against an invasion. The third communique is where the US and China agree that this is where the one China policy comes out of. They start saying, well, we all kind of agree there's one China, we're not going to clarify what that means. The Taiwanese requested these 6 assurances, and those assurances come in and kind of explain. There's actually some confusion on what this declassified memo says the assurances are, what Congress says they are, but essentially they say, we have not decided your sovereignty in Taiwan with China. We are not going to force you to do that, and we're not going to force you into any discussions. Eric?
I think this is a very troubled time because that is about the time from the Nixon administration to the Reagan administration. Taiwan relation, let me clarify a little bit. If you go and do some research on the internet, you go to American Institute in Taiwan's website, AIT, which is for American Institute in Taiwan, is the de facto U.S. embassy in Taiwan because, U.S. doesn't recognize Taiwan as a country. There used to be an embassy in Taipei, but after, I think it's the Carter administration terminated diplomatic relationships and the embassy migrated to Beijing. So back then, during the Carter administration, Taiwan Relations Act is passed by U.S. Congress. So this is more like a domestic law. The 3 communique between U.S. and China, PRC, is the diplomatic treaty between PRC and United States. The 6 assurances is unofficial assurances by the Reagan administration after the 3rd communique is announced. So this is one China. Thank you.
Yep.
Thanks, Eric. Today, everyone's looking at Taiwan. The reason all of you are here, and you saw the maps, is clearly there's a danger, and the question is, well, what do we do about it? Nobody actually wants to go to war over Taiwan, so how do we avoid that? CSIS, and since they're here with the Pacific Forum, shout out to them, had a war game situation recently where they found in their scenarios that the US and allies would probably win a war over Taiwan, but at a high cost. Lots of people in Taiwan would die, lots of people in China, and Taiwan's economy would be crushed. So their recommendation is to strengthen deterrence immediately. Question?
What does CSIS stand for?
The Center for Strategic and International Studies.
Thank you.
They are a think tank in DC, and they have a branch here in Hawaii that's called the Pacific Forum. And the Institute for Study of War also did a study on this, and they basically came to the conclusion that the situation is that China currently is engaging in gray zone actions around Taiwan and Kinmen Island and those outlying islands specifically, where they are declaring identification zones where they can say we control the airspace here. They start pushing out their Coast Guard. They're saying diplomatic statements about how they control this area and that area, investigating ships, boarding people. That is all gray zone tactics where China is trying to pretend like they own these islands and have control over them. And the recommendations from the Institute for Study of War are, first off, kind of learning from the Ukraine war. Pre-bunking is the term they use, justifications of China for invading Taiwan. So this would be like selective intelligence releases. If China were about to invade, you release the intelligence that says, this is about to happen. They are coming. And so everyone kind of knows, and like, if there's a security incident, releasing information about that incident to make it clear whose fault was what was going on, so that China can't use it as a pretext. And then also reaffirming Taiwan's rights under international law. And that will bring us to the next speaker, Eric and Carol, going to that topic. Thank you very much.
Hi, my name is Eric Chu. I'm currently with international program of Richardson, and it's very nice to talk about where I'm coming from. And Taiwan has been frequently discussed in the media, not only because it's, technology development or its contribution to the globe. It's more like, what's really happening in the this very fast-pacing geopolitics change. So I want to show you a short clip of NVIDIA's artificial intelligence, because I think this is going to change our life in the next 5 or 10 years. It's very interesting. It helps everybody. It also helps Taiwan's economy. And I just want to, because I don't think that everybody is aware, how this AI thing doing. So let's start with the clip and I'll continue with the presentation. This is part of the recent artificial intelligence development that you can see it's being applied in different areas, including the human DNA's development, proteins, physicization, electric vehicles, automation, driving, in different aspects. But I think, this NVIDIA, of course, everybody knows that, NVIDIA is only designing chips. And what is the connection between artificial intelligence with semiconductors? And, what this has to do with AI, with Taiwan? I think, we have to go back to history and see how Taiwan is people call it an island, it's a country, doesn't matter, how it's evolved, and how does it become from Asian tiger, one of the Asian tigers, to a technology powerhouse? How does it happen? How does NVIDIA emerge because of Taiwan? So, I think I'll just give you a short answer to that is, NVIDIA is the one who designed the chip. And artificial intelligence are operated mostly based on those semiconductor chips. And Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, which is located headquartered in Taiwan, is the one who manufactured all the semiconductor chip, or most of it. So, thank you so much. So I think, Taiwan, we are able to facilitate that. As a facilitator, I think we have to go back to history and see, how Taiwan is involved. And it has a lot to do with the transition from rule by law to rule of law. And that is the cornerstone of Taiwan's progressive innovation. And I have to say that Taiwan, being a democratic region or island or country, is actually by accident. It used to be a total, authoritarian. I'll explain later, down the agenda. And from there, I'll go to the development of rule of law and the concept of what is the so-called the chip foundry, pure play chip foundry, and the opportunity that brings along with all this legal practice, including, export control, IP, intellectual property, and the extraterritorial legal effect. And lastly, I'll talk about the challenge for Taiwan, including the pursuit of the next sacred mountain, which is the Silicon Shield, and its relations with artificial intelligence. But if you have any questions, please, raise your hand and we can talk about it. So after Civil War, the nationalist government moved to Taiwan, and from 1949, the martial law enacted, and it comes with white terror. And I'll expand a little bit on the white terror and the so-called temporary provisions. It's kind of freeze the operation of constitution. So from 1940, I think somewhere around 1949, that there is no democracy at all. There is a lot of seizure. People are thrown in jail, executed even, and it's very chaotic. So in the meantime, during that time, Korean War occurred. So there are a lot of regional security development, including the Taiwanese actually wanted to go back to the nationalist government. They want to go back to China. So they're taking this opportunity to negotiate with the US government, seeing if there's, because without all this supply, it's impossible for Taiwan to do it alone, right? The national government, I mean. So those are the development, the background back then. And there's a resolution 274058 that we talk about, that, which Professor Peterson will explain later, back then, the Republic of China is actually has a seat in the UN, but because of the change of the political climate and the diplomatic relations, Taiwan renounced, national government decided to renounce that, and then the PRC took over. So that's the background of it. This is a very dark time for Taiwan because, the national government began, even before its arrival, needs to, clear the field, so to speak. They started to work with, to instruct the garrison command, which is founded back then, work with the intelligence unit, and they start to go out and, take people into prison, and at least this is the official record that at least 3,000 to 4,000 people were executed, not including the day that occurred on February 28. I think it's 1948 or 49.
Eric, who's fighting who? Is that the Chiang Kai-shek's people are getting rid of people that they feel are aligned with the communists, with Mao Zedong? I mean, I don't understand who's killing who.
Okay, I think this is a very good question. Just like imagine what, what Xi Jinping is doing in China, right now, because of corruption and a lot of stuff, right? And who are they, putting people in jail? What kind of people? The people are corrupted.
Or the people that are a threat to his power.
Yes, and back then, I think there's nothing like that. It's more like they want to clear the field, and so they basically just slaughtered its own people. That, as long as you're a doctor, you are intellectuals, the lawyers.
Is this not Taiwan?
This is in Taiwan.
Taiwan was not always a very nice place.
No, it's not.
I know, but 28,000 people?
Yes.
Chiang Kai-shek murdered 28,000 of
Yes.
the million that came over?
Yes.
He was a
Not
horrible
the million that came over, it's
Indigenous people as well.
No, it's not indigenous, it's the people being immigrated to Taiwan many generations before.
Right, so they
Because
were.
they-
One that
this is-
married the immigrant.
You have to realize that this is right after the Japanese colonization, right? So the Japanese, even the Japanese colony, the Japanese government, they educated, they put in infrastructure in Taiwan. they educated, people like, the President Lee, I'm just going to mention later in the slides, they send people back to Japan for education. And, they, put a lot of effort doing the infrastructure, but suddenly we have all this, Chinese coming after the Civil War, coming from China. We saw we are the same kind of people. They are not Japanese, they should be our ally, but no, they're not. That's why I mentioned there's a huge identity issue for the current Taiwanese people. Are we Taiwanese or are we Chinese? Chinese seem not to be our friend, they are not our ally, although we're from the same place, but this is what happened. And the first, I think, including my grandfather's, who is my mother's side, that he was a school headmaster. He has to go and hide during that time.
Because he'd been educated in Japan, and
That's right.
Kai-shek felt that these people that were educated during the
You could have, different voices. They want the unified voices. You can't show your sympathy to the communists because there could be danger, that's what happened. So that's explained why still in the current Taiwanese society has this tendency that if you are smart enough, you shouldn't study law. You should go to medical school because it helps to save people. You don't want to be involved with politics. You need to be quiet. And that is the same mentality in the 1990s when those Taiwanese corporations go into China. Because we are very used to this treatment, right? We talk about economy. We want to make money, but we don't want trouble. Go ahead.
I'm sure this could be a gross oversimplification of the demographics, but could you estimate how much of the population came over from China with the Kuomintang right after the Civil War versus Chinese immigration before that plus intermarriage? And then maybe the third category would be tracing fully indigenous roots. If you broke down the population, those three categories, do you have a rough estimation of how much of the population, say by 1950, fell into those three categories?
I don't have the data, but I can tell you.
Can you repeat the question just for the?
The question is, you want to repeat your question?
I just make note. The question, maybe this is probably gross oversimplification of the demographics. I was asking around 1950, how much of the population was coming over from China recently, especially with the Kuomintang, during and right after the Chinese Civil War. How much had been immigration from China with intermarriage, and then how much would trace the roots purely indigenous? If you broke down the population, vast oversimplification into those three buckets around 1950, what would the estimated split in population be between those three?
Well, I apologize, I don't have the number, but I can tell you right now, Taiwan has about 23 million people, and 80% are, maybe including the aboriginals and the immigrants, immigrants from China many generations ago. So that comprises about 80%. I don't know the number back in the 1950s, but this is the number. I think I got the number from the government website, so this number are pretty accurate.
What's the other 20%?
20% is from the immigrants from China right after Civil War. They're still around, but they are just aging. And, that also includes some of their offsprings that, they consider or identify themselves as Chinese. So that's why I said, if you are, talking about identity, there's a big issue inside Taiwan that whether it's not like Hawaii, right? Most people consider yourself as Hawaiian, but Taiwan has this identity issue because of, historical reasons. Yes.
So I just wanted to understand you, thank you. Thank you. I keep hearing the word Aboriginal, and the only phrase I've ever heard that from is with Australia. Can you help me understand the folks who are living in the mountains and why you use that word? Is there a connection there?
What I mean Aboriginal is actually indigenous people. They are, they don't live in the mountains during maybe prior to the Dutch colonization, because they are the people who lived there before all Chinese migrated from China. So, if you're interested in that part of so actually Taiwan made a lot of movies on that. And one of them is Sikaru. You can Google it, and I'm happy to provide you with, it's on YouTube, so you can watch it. It's free. And the other one, of course, is the Rainbow Warrior. That is the indigenous people fighting against the Japanese. So that will give you some, good background information on what's happening back then.
Eric, if I may, real quick.
Sure. So actually, when Eric sent me these videos and shows, I watched all of them, which are awesome. And it's fascinating because Sikalu is about there was one group called the Hakka, but essentially the Chinese immigrant groups that were living in the lowlands and how their relations worked with the indigenous tribes in the mountains. And the indigenous tribes basically had all the soldiers and they were renting out the land to these Han Chinese groups. And that show in particular takes place on the very southern peninsula of Taiwan. And it's kind of like a lawless area. And then City Ballet actually takes place later on during Japanese occupation in like the 1930s, but not in 1895. I actually don't know if there's a movie about the actual Republic of Formosa, but those two are not, so they're separate. On the population number 2, briefly looking at it, I think the population of Taiwan in 1950 was about 8 million. And roughly looking around on the internet like everyone else can, I think about 1.5 million people came over during the migration of the KMT to Taiwan. So it was a significantly large chunk of people, and they were mostly soldiers too.
Yeah, so, yes.
Yeah, I was, Adrian, I was telling about, I was just mentioning to Eric, there's a novel, I don't know if you've read it, it's called Green Island. Green Island was, it was an island where a lot of the people who were, I guess, a threat to Chiang Kai-shek's regime, where they were imprisoned. And it was by a UH professor, her name is Shauna Yang Ryan. So I invite you to go and read it. It gives you sort of like a personal view of what the Taiwanese went through during that white terror. So there were some really very vivid things, like when they would seize them, instead of handcuffing them, they would, and I don't know, you can tell me, Eric, if this is true, they actually would have a wire and string through their hand to keep them together. And that was really kind of a visual that I from the book that I don't know if it's true, but I guess maybe it did happen. So, but you really get a sense of what life was like under this Chiang Kai-shek regime.
Not very nice.
It wasn't very nice.
No, it's not. And I heard also the horrible stories during the garrison command that they torture people, how they torture people, like, they have various ways to make you talk, like they'll pull out your fingernails.
Yes. And you can talk about the 228 memorial.
Yeah, the 228 memorial is in Taipei, near Taipei Land Station, if you had the chance to visit Taipei. And, each year is, because the 228, the name occurred on the incident of the
228.
large-scale massacre occurred on February 28 of 1948 or 1949, sometime that. We have a memorial, we have a ceremony each year that the government, the president will come out and join the ceremony to pay tribute to those people who sacrificed during that time. And when I come to Hawaii and I attend one of the events that Professor Yamamoto was talking about, the Japanese being Japanese American being put in the concentration camp in California on the mainland, that kind of resonates, but I think this is much more serious in a lot of ways. Okay, I'll before I move on to the next slide, I want to mention The City of Sadness. This is also a movie in 1989 that talks about white terror and also the background, the Japanese colonial colony transition from Japanese colony to the nationalist government regime. So if you have time, that's a very good movie that provides a lot of inspiration internationally, especially to some of the new generation movie directors in Japan. So I encourage you, if you have time,
Is that online?
It's online. You probably need to pay for that on Amazon, on Prime, but YouTube, I don't think you will be able to get that.
English subtitles?
Yes.
Yeah. One more question before you leave this period. Actually, it's be a little bit before this period about the Japanese colonial period. So Japanese colonialism and imperialism in other parts of Asia was also extremely brutal. But you described the Japanese colonial period in Taiwan as a period of development. Can you go back to that a little bit more and maybe fill that out? If it wasn't as brutal as some other parts of Asia, can you explain why?
I think that's a very good question. That involves another movie. It's called Pachinko. That's on Apple TV. Also, you have to pay for that. But that Pachinko, that movie talks about exactly resonate what you're saying. Is it talks about multi-generation Korean family moving from during the World War I and World War II, moving to Japan, Osaka, Japan, and then to the United States. So the background talks about why Korean hates Japanese so much, why they just can't get along with each other. And the short answer to your question is, during the Japanese colony, Japanese did a lot of stuff in Taiwan, basically putting a lot of infrastructure, unlike Korea. They put in a lot of efforts, educate people, they move even people from Taiwan to Manchuria, especially those doctors, because Taiwan just loves doctors, medical doctors, they like many doctors that they can. They move people to Manchuria, they put in a lot of effort, and my grandfather's generation, they feel it, how Japanese colonial government treated people and the national, government treating people. And I think, it's, you can blame the nationalists because they just, they are defeated, they don't have any resource, they come over here without any resource, all they want is going back to China. Taiwan is just a temporary place where Japan, they want to build Taiwan. That's why I think Taiwanese tend to have a different feeling about Japan and the Japanese people.
There was actually a very interesting book that my mom gave me right before this talk, thanks Mom. This particular topic also, because Sadiq Ballet, that movie, was a point in time where Japan's rule was oppressive and they were kind of trying to civilize, especially the indigenous tribes, which, civilizing has a very mixed history, and it involves going in and destroying a village or moving people around. That's why there was this riot at this point in time. The particular protagonist in that movie is fighting against this, and he tries to apologize for an insult to a Japanese official. The Japanese official says, I want your apology, get out of here, I'm going to destroy your whole village, and that's when he riots. It's after that that Japan shifts in their mindset for occupying Taiwan and saying, look, we need to stop doing this oppressive mode and start thinking more about how we can promote it. And one of the things that's interesting, talking about crisis, especially tying it to Hawaii, actually it's funny you talk about identity crisis. We are not going to get into identity crisis in Hawaii about Hawaiians and indigeneity, but in Taiwan, one of the things that's fascinating is that Japan, because they start drawing those borders that we were showing before between the savage lands and the non-lands, they create this concept of indigeneity, of an indigenous identity. The indigenous populations before then didn't necessarily have a group collective identity. They were fighting each other as much as they were fighting anybody else. But because they started being administratively dealt with by the Japanese as a whole, they created this singular indigenous identity. And that starts getting played up through tourism, where they start marketing the indigenous tribes and like playing it up and selling it, right? Similar thing to Hawaii. So it's a very fascinating angle, but that one 1930 Sadiq Ballet riot, that's where a lot of that shit happened.
I have to say, I've been to Taiwan and Pingtung. And I've been several years ago with Rotary. We went to Taiwan and we went down to Kaohsiung and then into Pingtung with the Aboriginal tribes, and these kids were amazing. This vest was made by them and given to me, and I've got some others, where the kids are all dressed in Nike shoes and stuff, but when they do their, let's say their historical dances and singing, I said they look like American Indians from Wyoming or whatever. So if they came down from, and they were headhunters, and I got this thing that shows they love to hunt heads. But they were amazing, wonderful, beautiful people. And I understand about and exactly picking up what Sam said, they turned it into a tourist attraction. And the physical beauty down there is mind-blowing. The mountains and everything else, it's just amazing people down there.
Well, thank you for your comment. And I just want to mention one more thing about the Sikalu that you are going to see on YouTube. Again, it's free, so go ahead and watch it. I think they have 7 or 8 episodes online, so you'll be able to see it for free. In that episode, in those episodes, shows that the Chinese immigrant back then, they are not just Han people. They are divided into different ethnic groups.
From China.
From China. For example, the one in Hokkien are different from Hakka, so they fight each other. And the Hokkien, they arrive earlier than the Hakka, so they occupy all the fertile, lands, farmlands, all the resources. They just control it. Whereas Hakka, they are being put to the mountains. They have to. They're being driven to the mountains, and the two groups fighting each other. They kill each other. So, in those episodes, you'll see the indigenous people are sort of in the middle because they are the earliest. They are the original inhabitants, right? They live there, and they are sort of, we are not interested in citing either of them, but, if the interest is aligned, then we are allies. So you'll be able to see that dynamics going on. It's pretty good. Now, let's move on, fast forward to to 98 is where the Carter's administration decided to terminate the diplomatic relations with the Republic of China, which is Taiwan. And the US embassy back then, still in Taipei, but they migrated to Beijing. And, that is the diplomatic, development. Within US, the Congress, some people in the Congress thought, well, it's not the right thing to do, and Taiwan still has its own strategic, value. So several of the, I think it's a bipartisan, consensus that we should pass something for Taiwan to support Taiwan, and by recognizing its own strategic value. So back then, Taiwan Relations Act is enacted. I think there are a couple of very important things in the Taiwan Relations Act. Number one, there will be no embassy in Taipei, but we're going to have an institute that represents United States government. That is the American Institute in Taiwan. They just recently moved from downtown Taipei to Neihu, where I used to live. It's a walking distance from my apartment. It's a beautiful compound. It's interesting that I've been invited because of my past work. I've been invited into the institute many times. So that's what happened. And the second thing is, in the Taiwan Relations Act is the US government will maintain the arms sales to Taiwan for self-defense purposes. So that's what it has. And number three is, of course, Taipei American School. We gotta have some, education institution in Taipei for our operation, whatever. So that's what it is. And do you have any questions on that? Go ahead.
What's the American Institute? Is it Is the American Institute kind of like the US's version of the Taiwan Economic Cultural Office? Which is like because the PRC, ROC, and Taiwan not being, you drive down the Pali and you see every country's got an embassy, but Taiwan is the Economic Culture Office.
I think that's correct. The ROC embassy in the United States is located in Washington, D.C., which we call is Twin Oaks. If you Google it, Twin Oaks, that's a former embassy of Qing Dynasty of China. And then after, ROC took over, it becomes ROC's embassy. But now, because of diplomatic change, the embassy becomes the representative of Institute of Taiwan and Economic, Cultural, stuff, and then U.S. Embassy in Taipei becomes American Institute of Taiwan. So, does that answer your questions?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So, I want to briefly mention a couple of people during the, evolution of Taiwan's democracy. This guy, CCK, he is the eldest son of Chiang Kai-shek. He was sent to Moscow for college in early days. That's a very good question because back then, KMT, nationalists, and Communist Party, they're all the same. Back then they are trying to seek alliance because they don't have any resources. What can they do to fight against the Qing dynasty? Because that's or the warlords in the different regions. So they need resources, and that's purpose he was sent to Moscow because Chiang Kai-shek is seeking alliance.
Oh, this was before
This is way before.
In the 30s or something.
But he was one of the presidents in Taiwan in the early days, right after Chiang Kai-shek.
Yeah,
After Chiang Kai-shek passed away, he became president. Of course, there's another one in the middle, but that is, that could be, I think he's more important. His guiding principle is, I don't want to contact any with communists because, he was a communist before. So he know what communist is going to play against you. So his guiding principle is 3 no's, which is no contact, no negotiation, no compromise. So back then that is, and remember, back then he was the head, he used to be the head of Taiwan, the ROC intelligence unit. So he's aware of all this political, jail or prisons or, they put people in jail, and that includes him. So he has, as you can see, he looks very nice guy, right? He has 2 very different multi-faces, as we said. So, but he also did good things, including during his term, he abolished martial law right before he passed away. And he also terminated the temporary provisions. And he handpicked President Lee, which is the next slide, as his successor. That's President Lee right here. He was appointed by CCK right before CCK passed away. And that is all the beginning of these democratic movements and his accomplishment, including the parliamentary reform. There used to be 2 Congress in the government. And one of the Congress is actually, there's, sort of like US Senate, and the members are mostly from China. So he's trying, one of his accomplishments, I think, is failing, terminating that Congress and sending, retiring those people and then do the governmental reform structure-wise.
I noticed you said that he was educated at Kyoto University. So was he population in Taiwan before the Civil War, before he came over during the Japanese occupation and was sent up to Japan for education?
Well, actually, in his autobiography, he said, before 20 years old, I'm a Japanese citizen. After 20 years old, he becomes a Chinese citizen. And if you're going back to that City of Sadness movie, you'll see there's a line, it's a very very good line that people always, remember, is that Taiwanese people are so sad. That's why the movie is about, right? We have gone through, nobody wants us, everybody dumped us, like, the Dutch, they come and occupy us and they ditch us. The Spanish, they did the same thing. The Japanese did the same thing. Nobody loved us, right? We are the one who is being slapped around. So, and to answer your question, I think the question is very good, is that he was educated during the Japanese colonial period. He was sent because he did excellent in school, so he was sent to Kyoto University. He even served in the Imperial Japanese Army before, the national government came to Taiwan. And of course, then after that, he continued his education with the National Taiwan University, and then did his PhD in Cornell. So he's a very typical, I think I have limited time. So let me get through this slides very quickly, and he was identified by Time magazine as Mr. Democracy. I want to talk briefly about K.T. Lee. K.T. Lee is also from China after the Civil War, he also did a lot of good things. He's the one who retained Morris Chang, the founder of TSMC, and a lot of people remember. I mean, it's not people from China are not all evil, right? They also did a lot of good things for Taiwan, and so when we talk about Chinese, actually, there's a mixed feeling. So I think, and also I want to highlight is one of the accomplishments for President Lee is to build a high-speed rail, and it runs 186 miles per hour. I don't know if you ever had the chance to take that train. It used to be from Taipei to Kaohsiung, which is the city over here. From Taipei, if you take a regular train, you usually take 5 hours to get there. But within high-speed rail, I think it's maybe 90 minutes an hour. So
it's pretty fast.
It's very fast. Built by the Japanese. So it's built by Japanese. We bought that from Japanese.
Oh,
so,
you mean just recently? I mean, like
yeah, just recently.
Yeah, right.
Yes.
Yeah, right.
So we kind of
Shinkansen.
Yeah, Shinkansen, the bullet train. So and the significance of it is that Taiwan, we have like Hsinchu. This is where most of the semiconductor is located, right? Manufacturing is located, but it is a limited space, so we need more space. So we go down here and here. So the high-speed rail helps to connect everybody from one place to the other, and that's the main thing for high-speed rail. Really helps to promote the efficiency and economy, and that's why Morris Chang said, to put a semiconductor fabs in the United States or otherwise outside Taiwan is not efficient. If you want the lowest cost, you got to do it all in Taiwan, because we over the last 40 years we built everything in Taiwan. We have everything. So the best thing to do it cheaply, efficiently, is to do it in Taiwan. Now the new Shinkansen actually was planned from here to here. So I don't know when this is going to happen. Maybe in the next 20 years or so. It may take 20 years to build this, or I don't know. So that is the road not taken. That after CCK, we choose a different path from China. That we decided to go democracy, and it's not. We don't have that on purpose. It is through a different ways of development, and I don't want to get into the detail of it, because the time is limited. But this is what I'm trying to say. And also the idea of pure play chip foundry. This is proposed by Morris Chang, who is retained by KT Lee. And I'll briefly explain who Morris Chang is and his contribution.
We were talking about this a little bit before, but can you expand before we move on, because we do want to get to Professor Peterson too, is the interplay between the rule of law and Taiwan's economic success?
Well, thank you, Sam. I think that's a very good question. I think without the democracy means the rule of law, right? We have the rule of law running, this is the government structure. So we have an independent judicial review, just like the United States, although it may not be as mature. But I think the value is to protect innovation. We have a legal system being in place. We have a government. We protect private property. We award the innovation that's being made. Like in TSMC here, we have this patent award, dinner that we'll get together, and the CEO will come out and put an award in the inventor's hand, saying, well, good job done, and I hope you continue the efforts.
And you have an independent judiciary.
Yes, we have an independent judiciary. Yeah, it's very important. So we have now, I think since 2022, we even have a independent constitutional court, because we realize the government realized that, I don't want to go into detail, but, before the Constitutional Court is founded, the court only interpret statutes, seeing if that is constitutional, not actual cases. So it's different from the common law system where, we only adjudicate cases, we don't give advisory opinions from Marbury versus Madison, although that's tradition. But, the civil law country is different. And since 2022, the government decided that it's not enough anymore, that we can't just adjudicate statutes, we have to adjudicate cases too, and we have to have an independent, I think it's more like Germany, we have an independent, unified, all the constitutional disputes. And I think just a week ago, we have this, constitutional adjudication that the court put a lot of restriction on implementing death penalty. So, it's literally making death penalty impossible in Taiwan. So I think it's a great movement going forward. So, so those are the important concepts and also milestones. Project RCA is the first project that Taiwan government decided back in the 1970s to send people to United States for semiconductor technology transfer. Those are the guys who've been sent to the United States in the first batch and learned about how semiconductor manufacturing is done in the fab. So going back, so there are a couple of very important decisions made during the time in the 1970s. One is we call it ITRI, Industry, Technology, and Research Institute. Still leads the technology development nowadays. It belongs to the Ministry of Economics. It's not a private institution. They receive government subsidy to do nothing but figure out the next generation of technology. That could be, biotechnology, that could be electric engineering, it could be artificial intelligence. It covers a very wide range of technology. And as I mentioned, Katie Lee in the 1970s decided to retain Morris Chang, who is the founder of TSMC in the 1980s. Back then we have E3, he was retained as the chairperson of E3, and then later on he moves to UMC as chairman, and then left UMC and founded TSMC, which is the largest chip manufacturing company in the world. So this is more like how semiconductor is about. This is a Moore's law that talks about number of transistors in IC roughly doubles every 2 years. So Morris Chang was recruited by Taiwan government in the late 1970s and early 1980s. He was retained firstly as a E3 chairman, and then he left, and then founded UMC and also TSMC. So those just quickly, how the semiconductor industry is divided. Basically, we divide it as a memory and application-specific IC, which we call ASIC. Those are the companies that currently still around, doing manufacturing, semiconductor manufacturing. This is the process of, the IC circuits is made. I think, when you're hearing like 2 nanometer, 1 nanometer, or 40 nanometer, it all has to do with lithography. It means that it's just like your drawing, right? You design a chip, and then you put it on the mask, and you mask your design. You have a lamp or something, and then you will map on the silicon wafers, right? So you use chemicals to wash to make those circuit. That's what we call etching, and then ion implementation, and then you cut them into dices, and then you package it as an IC, as a computer chips. Those are the some kind of quickly. Those are the some kind of the supply chain. The name may come up very frequently. ASML is a Dutch company. Now is the most significant company in the lithography area. Of course, we got those other companies as well. TSMC and UMC, they're all from Taiwan. ASE is also from Taiwan, is doing the packaging, but now TSMC is starting to do it right now. Of course, you hear a lot about NVIDIA, about AMD. Those are the IC design houses. They are part of the semiconductor supply chain. So they design chips. They don't make chips. They only design it. And then they'll hand it to foundry like TSMC to make chips. And, after they make those wafers, chips, and, company like ASC will, put in dices and they'll package it as an integrated circuit. And those are the chips that artificial intelligence is based.
Quick question. I watched one of the videos in the original email showing Gina Raimondo, our commerce leader, saying that we are incorporating this here in the US. So I'm just curious as to, is there some kind of agreement, or are we also a standalone in the US now with these chips?
Thank you. That's a very good question. I think back in 2000, this is 2015, 2016, that, we've been invited, I was invited, and together with my boss, Dick Thurston, he was formerly as the general counsel of TSMC, and then we founded after he retired from TSMC, we moved into a firm called Ewing Morris, and then we're U.S. firms.
You were, I want to confirm, Eric, you were in-house counsel for TSMC, is that right?
Yeah, that's even before that. So what I'm talking about is to your questions. Back then AIT gave us an invitation. So, they know we're all from Dick and I, we're all from TSMC. We used to be in-house up there. So we, they're asking, they have been meeting with Morris Chang many times. All they wanted is, semiconductor manufacturing back into the United States. They want that. And, Morris keeps saying no, because it's not efficient, as I explained. Everything is in Taiwan. United States, you can't even get a bullet train running. How can you get semiconductor manufacturing down to like 25 nanometers back then to manufacturing in the United States? But they keep pushing, and then, of course, we are one of the push as well, because we think it's good for everybody, especially considering the position that Taiwan has. We can't put all the eggs in one basket, right? So that's the mentality. So, there are a lot of photos I can't show you, but we did have those meetings inside AIT. And they call Select USA's initiative, which is to encourage foreign international investment into the United States. Nowadays, the initiative still continues. That initiative actually started from the Obama administration. But to make the answer short, we have that discussion. That's what's being accomplished in Arizona, in Phoenix, Arizona. Now TSMC is building, I think, 2 fabs in Arizona with 2 nanometer technology. So that's what that's what it's about. Okay, let's move on to, we can do more Q&A afterwards if you have any further questions. Those are the IC design houses, but please remember, nothing is forever. NVIDIA is on the top of it, but who knows? It could be like Intel. Look at what Intel nowadays, right? Okay, so those opportunity brings this extraterritorial legal effect. In the US, our more familiar phrase is no-arm jurisdiction, right? US, because you do business with the United States, you need to care about everything. You need to, do the compliance, you need to do the M&A, you need to make everything legal, you need to comply with all the securities, including TSMC is a New York NYSE, New York Stock Exchange listed company. Its stock is listed in NYSE for trading. So is UNC. Of course, you have the GDR as well. Protection of intellectual property. Those are all, law firms. How law firms making money. I was involved with this and this. Partly with this. A little bit with this, but not much. So those are the key areas nowadays Taiwan corporations are facing. They're all in the United States. Antitrust litigation, I'm personally involved with this one. This one I was helping from when I was with the firm. Intellectual property, I was personally involved with this one. There are 2 waves. I was involved in the first wave and the second wave.
Eric, can you identify for the people on Zoom that can't see you?
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, so the antitrust litigation, I was involved with the DRAM antitrust litigation. It was we call it the MDL, multi-district. It's certified, there are class actions, and certified in the Northern District of California. This is, I think, the year when I was involved is 2004. I was involved with the memory antitrust, and of course, a lot of companies are involved. Kimonda from Germany, Toshiba from Japan, Micron is involved, and other Taiwanese company who manufacture memory, semiconductor memory chips. TFT LCD antitrust litigation, I wasn't personally involved with that, but a lot of Taiwanese companies did. Chime, which is Chime is Innolux right now, known as Innolux. There, I think 2 or 3 their executives are confiscated in the United States. Their passport being confiscated. They spend 2 years in jail, and they have to pay a lot of money out of it. So that's why we call it a long-arm jurisdiction. TSMC versus SMIC, that's a trade secret and patent litigation in the Northern District of California. Originally started with State Court of California. I was there for the trial when I was with Haynes and Boone. It was fascinating when you see during the discovery or during the trial, those files show up, actually has, obtained from, produced by SMIC in China, but actually has TSMC, marks on it. So they, what happened.
I don't want to rush you, Eric, but we gotta get timing, we gotta stay on schedule, so.
Okay. Now there are a lot of patent litigation going on, IP transaction, of course. So this is Taiwan's challenge. TSMC, now known as the Silicon Shield and also the Sacred Mountain. Where is the next Sacred Mountain? We don't know because nothing is ever green, right? So this is what Taiwan or the people in Taiwan are, they are looking for. We talk about Arizona. Now, Silicon Shield has been, being expanded to Japan, to Arizona, to Dresden, Germany. Artificial intelligence, people are saying, we are not sure how real is AI, the demands, and if within the 5 years is not mature enough for a lot of things, including, vehicle automation whatsoever, it's going to go away because it's not real. Geopolitical change, of course, we see a lot. We are seeing the trend of CPU, of course, in the time of Intel. We'll move into the time of NVIDIA now, which is the GPU graphic processing unit. And now we're dealing with the new technology, which is the NPU, nerve processing unit, and the quantum computing. So those are the pursuit for the next Sacred Mountain. We're talking about artificial intelligence. We talk about, now what have been, personally involved with the brand and generic pharma, especially in the United States. There are patent litigation going on, antitrust as well, DOJ is involved, generic development, electric vehicle, of course, semiconductors, ICT, and the next killer applications. This is the Silicon Shield and its expansion. Now, originally, we all do everything in Taiwan now, to Arizona, to Phoenix, Kumamoto in Japan, Dresden, Germany. I think the next step may be in Southeast Asia. I don't know, but there have been a lot of discussion about this. To Middle East, probably not, although they have all their money, and they, Global Foundries is the one who is backed up by the people over there, but we just don't know. Geopolitical change. This is what Taiwan is facing right now in reality. We don't have enough electricity, but we are phasing out the nuclear power. So what are we going to do? Rely on green energy? It's not going to happen. Water is, semiconductor processing needs a lot of water. The population is aging. We don't have enough people, enough talents. Regional security, of course, that's a big issue. South Korea, North Korea, Japan, China, securities interests and economic interests.
Wow.
Thank you so much.